Texas is essentially putting gold and silver on digital rails. But I don't want us getting so excited by the words gold-backed that we stop asking the questions that matter. It means we ask better ones and harder ones. I want to take you to Texas because something important is about to happen there. Beginning September 1st, Texas will formally recognize qualifying gold and silver specie as legal tender. Ta-da! Now, I want to be very clear about what that means because a Texas store can already voluntarily say, yes, I'll take your physical gold and silver in payment. So people have always been able to agree on what they'll exchange with each other. What changes on September 1st is that Texas is formally recognizing qualifying gold and silver specie as legal tender under state law. Yay! Now, of course, nobody is forced to use it or accept it. But to me, sound money should be about expanding your choices, not replacing one compulsory system with another one. However, that's only the first part of this story. The part that I really want us watching comes next, because Texas has also authorized an electronic payment system using a currency backed by gold and by silver, okay? And the bullion is held in the Texas Bullion Depository. Now, that part of the law goes into effect on May 1st of 2027. But I want you to think about that. Digital rails, stable coins, digital currency, and tokenization. In fact, we have a Money Maps deep dive on this scheduled for September 5th. And here, Texas is essentially putting gold and silver on digital rails. That gets my attention, and it should get yours too. And of course, Daniel Diaz and I are going to follow this closely on Sound Money Hour, because passing a sound money law is only just beginning. That's just the start. And how they build it actually determines whether it strengthens your sovereignty or not. So if you want to follow these changes with us as they unfold, hit the like and subscribe, because on the Sound Money Hour, the second Monday of every month at 6 Eastern Standard Time, we're going to follow the rules, the structure, and who controls what. One of the arguments against gold has always been convenience. How do you use an ounce of gold to buy groceries? And how do you make change? How do you send it across town in seconds? Well, those are real problems. But notice something. Those are primarily problems with the rail, not the asset. Technology can change the rail. So imagine physical bullion held in a depository while some representation of that bullion can move electronically when you make a payment. Now you have physical gold and silver underneath and a digital rail on top. And that could make sound money much more usable. And that's exactly the first step. But I don't want us getting so excited by the words gold-backed that we stop asking the questions that matter. Because we've heard backed by gold before. Look at Zimbabwe. Backed by is not the same thing as redeemable. And that distinction becomes really, really important with this bill. Here's something I think we need to watch very closely, because the final law doesn't answer everything. The earlier versions of this legislation contain much more specific language about holding the bullion in trust and maintaining enough metal to redeem all of the currency. Now, this final draft, it's different. It says that the electronic currency will be backed by gold and silver bullion held in the Texas Bullion Depository. But the final enrolled bill does not spell out a direct right for you to redeem the electronic currency for physical metal. That doesn't mean that redemption won't be available. It means we don't know enough yet. The rules still have to be written, and that is exactly where I want us to pay attention. If my phone says I have 10 gold units, I want to know, what do those units legally represent? Can I redeem them for physical gold? Who owns the bullion while it's sitting in the depository? What fees do I pay? Who audits it? And what happens if I want to leave the electronic system altogether? Because that, my friends, is what gives the public their power. And those are ownership questions. And ownership is where sovereignty lives. Now, Daniel raised another really big concern that I think is really important. We absolutely want states recognizing gold and silver as legal tender. But what we don't want is for the state to gradually become the only doorway through which people can access sound money. Interestingly, an earlier version of this bill would have made the Texas Bullion Depository the state's exclusive issuer of the specie. So that provision did not survive into the final law, thank goodness. And I think removing it was very important. But the state still has considerable influence over the electronic system. The comptroller can establish or authorize one or more systems. The comptroller can approve vendors, including financial institutions. And the comptroller sets rules around transaction security, valuation, and fees. So Daniel and I are going to keep asking, does this create another option for people? Or over time, does it create a new gatekeeper? Because I don't want to leave one centralized structure only to put in another one in its place. And the purpose of sound money is not simply to have the word gold attached to the currency. The purpose is to restore choice, ownership, accountability, and public power. And so if you know somebody who hears digital gold and immediately decides it's either wonderful or terrible, please share this with them, because the label doesn't tell us enough. The structure does. And for decades, the fiat currency system has gotten easier and easier to use. Swipe, tap, click. Everything moved onto faster and more convenient rails. Gold and silver didn't lose their monetary properties. Look at this global central banks. But they did lose on convenience, and that's how everything is sold. How convenient. Well, technology can begin closing that gap. And this is where another plank may be changing underneath the ship of Theseus, the monetary ship. The digital rail does not have to belong exclusively to fiat currency. Sound money can travel on modern rails too, but only if we protect what makes it sound. Real backing, real clear ownership, competition, like ours against the state maybe, the ability to exit. And in my view, a clear path to physical redemption, because that's the only way you can exit. Otherwise, we may simply create another digital claim sitting between you and the asset. And that is not the same thing as ownership. So here's what Daniel and I will be watching as Texas moves toward implementation. I want to see the redemption rules and how exactly what the holder owns, who can become a vendor, and whether private providers can continue competing. I want to know what fees are charged and how the bullion is audited. And I want to see whether federal tax law treatment becomes part of the larger sound money conversation. Because I support what Texas is trying to do. But supporting sound money does not mean we stop asking those hard questions. It means we ask better ones and harder ones. Does this give people another real choice? Can I get to the underlying metal? Can the rules change? Can I leave the system? And does this structure put more control in my hands or somebody else's? Those are the questions that tell me whether something strengthens sovereignty. So please tell me in the comments, would you use this system if the gold and silver were fully backed, independently audited, and clearly redeemable for physical metal? And what would make you refuse to use it? That's probably the more important question. I want to hear that because those are exactly the questions Daniel and I can carry into Sound Money Hour as this system develops. And if this makes you wonder whether the gold or silver you already own is actually structured to do the job you need it to do, call us. Zang International strategy specialists are here to move this conversation forward and help determine whether or not the gold and the silver that you hold actually support what it's trying to do. We don't start with how many ounces do you want? We start with what are you trying to protect? Because whether the rail is physical or digital, the real question is still, what do you own and what can it actually do for you when you need it? Texas has opened the door. Now we need to make sure we understand where the door leads before we walk through it. And until next we meet, wherever you are in the world, stay safe, stay strong, and remember, sovereignty begins with what you choose to own. Bye-bye.